to jump on here and tell you the brief story about when I lost my faith in conventional medicine. Um, and what I've since found is that a lot of other doctors have too, secretly. But it happened on a particular day when I was visiting my parents. I was at my dad's house, and my dad was a general surgeon for many years. And I'm going to show you him right here. Let me go on this. This is my dad. This is what he looked like when he was in his 30s. But then this is what he looked like in his early 60s. And about 12 years after this picture right here, he would have passed away. So this was the year before he died. And I was visiting him, and he and I were watching TV in the living room, and I got up to go out and just do something else. And I think, sensed that he wasn't going to live much longer. And he said, "Hey, why don't you just sit with me a little longer?" And in that moment, the way he looked at me, I could kind of tell that he also sensed this. And I started to realize that, I should probably take this time, because I may not have a lot more times with him. My dad was my greatest mentor in life. He was a general surgeon. He entered college at age 16, went on to medical school. He was a prodigy, and had a very high IQ, genius IQ, and never missed a physics problem. So I sat with him a little bit longer, and then he turned to me and he said, "Stay away from sugar, and milk too." He said, "There's a lot of sugar in milk as well, but stay away from sugar." Now, in this last bit of his life, he could have told me any medical advice. He could have said, "Make sure you get on cholesterol medicine, make sure you get on a blood pressure medicine, make sure you do whatever." But he didn't. He said, "Stay away from sugar. Take it easy with that stuff." And so I thought about that. And then he passed away a year later. And then 10 years later was when the second part of the story is that I realized that I was kind of losing my faith in how we're managing medicine for the long run and for chronic disease. And I was in a surgeon's lounge. I was talking to a general surgeon, and he pretty much told me that he doesn't give his patients any dietary advice. And basically it's the diet that, their bad diet is what keeps them in business. And I started to think about it. And the truth is it's what keeps me in business too. The hemorrhages in the brain that I treat, excuse me, I got something in my eye all of a sudden. The spine issues that I deal with are largely caused by how people eat. Even the carpal tunnel syndrome, peripheral nerve disease, and a lot of other things. So, and then finally it came a day where I got a cholesterol panel back on myself and some other blood work. And I realized my cholesterol was high. I started looking into cholesterol medications, thinking maybe now's the time I need to probably consider going on one. And I started looking at the side effects of cholesterol medicines. And now I'm not saying that no one should take a cholesterol medicine. I want to be clear about this. And for the purposes of this is for educational purposes only. I'm not giving medical advice. Always consult with your doctor before you make any changes in your medicines. But here's my personal feelings about it was, first I looked at the way these medicines work, which is they block an enzyme in your liver. And I thought, well, shouldn't that enzyme actually work? I mean, you got that enzyme for a reason. We evolved over a long period of time to have enzymes. And maybe that enzyme is supposed to work. What's the consequence of blocking an enzyme? And then I started looking at the potential consequences. One of them is liver damage. So Then I saw other things that didn't go well with neurosurgery, like brain fog, muscle soreness. There's a particular complication called rhabdomyolysis, which is where a massive destruction of your muscle, which can lead to um, kidney failure, basically, because your muscles break down. All those things go into your bloodstream and clog up the kidneys. So I started thinking, I don't know if I really want to take these medicines. I started thinking back to what Dad said: stay away from sugar. And I thought, why would I think sugar has anything to do with my my cholesterol levels? And so I started researching further. And I'm going to pass this up. And let's pass this up. I want to show you this. This is how we learn about disease, chronic disease in medical school, right here. Each is its own lane, and each has its own treatments. Okay, you get diabetes, you got a set of medicines you take for diabetes: glipizide, Ozempic, whatever. You got a cholesterol problem, you take cholesterol medicines. If you got high blood pressure, you take a high blood pressure medicine. Overweight, same thing. Kidney disease, another one. So I didn't even really, the term metabolic syndrome didn't even register on my radar until, honestly, a few years ago. And I thought, why didn't they beat this up and beat this into our brain a lot harder when we were in med school? Because I started realizing all of these things are tied to each other. By the way, metabolic syndrome, if you wanted to know, because a lot of times the doctors don't know this as well. But metabolic syndrome, it consists of 5 things: diabetes, cholesterol, diabetes/insulin resistance. Okay, you need to know that. So technically, it's insulin resistance. It means your body's become resistant to the effect of insulin, and that ultimately leads to type 2 diabetes. But you can have insulin resistance for years before you actually have type 2 diabetes. And while it's active, you're going to see here shortly how much that affects your body, how much it makes you sick, and you don't even have the diagnosis yet. So this is the central feature right here, okay? Because it kind of causes all the others. If you don't have the insulin resistance part, you don't have metabolic syndrome. That's how important it is. So the way you get the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome is you've got insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. That's where it's going to the end stage. And any 2 of these others. So if you're overweight and you have high blood pressure and you're insulin resistant, you got metabolic syndrome. If you got a cholesterol problem and you got kidney disease and insulin resistance, you've got metabolic syndrome. Okay. So I started realizing all of these are tied together, and this seems to be the central feature. So why don't I address this? And I knew intuitively, thinking back to what my dad said, don't eat sugar. And then I started looking into, how do you improve insulin resistance? Well, it said get some exercise. I started to get some exercise, and things improved for a while, but I didn't improve my eating. So things started to get bad again. I lost a lot of weight, in fact, about 30, 35 pounds for a while, but my eating never changed. So after a while, I started regaining that weight. So I realized there was more to the story here. So let me explain to you. My hunger started overpowering the exercise eventually. So I want to explain to you how does that happen. Let me go back to the beginning here. So whenever you have insulin resistance, this is what your blood sugar curve looks like, okay? You eat a meal, and it's usually something with sugar or refined carbohydrates in it, which shoots your blood sugar up really fast, really high. And then you have this massive output of insulin to get that blood sugar out of your bloodstream into your cells, where it can be used as energy. Or if you've eaten too much, it will be converted into fat. Okay. So your blood sugar will go way up, and then it gets slam dunked below your baseline. What do you think you feel like when you're below the baseline? Hungry. You get hungry again. And from the moment you ate this food to this point right here, takes about 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours for some people, depending on how insulin resistant you are. So what do? You do it again, you eat, you dose yourself again, and you keep going through this curve over and over all day, every day. Instead, this is what you would really want your curve to look like after a meal. Not so high of a spike, and it kind of hangs out above the baseline for a while so you don't get hungry again so quickly. This is a normal curve, not this. So high insulin is the problem. Your body is putting out too much insulin once you become insulin resistant. That's why this starts to happen here. Okay. And if you can't get your insulin levels down, you're going to keep going through this, and you're going to keep driving all of those factors of metabolic syndrome: overweight, diabetes, cholesterol problems, kidney disease, high blood pressure. So I was caught in the cycle because I could not stay away from sugar. Here's what ends up happening to your blood insulin levels over time. By the way, to get, you have a normal level that your insulin should be, okay? From here to here. Every hormone that you have has a low and a high. If it gets out of that zone, then you get a problem, okay? Doesn't matter which hormone it is, whether it's testosterone, estrogen, insulin, thyroid hormone, you got to have a range. What starts to happen in this, from here to abnormally high insulin, can be as short as 6 weeks. 6 weeks of bad eating can put you into the insulin resistance zone. By the way, though, you can reverse it even faster. It can be reversed. You can lower those insulin levels in 2 or 3 weeks, which is the good news. But the problem is once you get here, once you're in baseline fasting insulin levels, that's when you're not eating. So you got a high insulin level even when you're not eating. Once those get up that high, you start driving yourself toward all of this other chronic disease. So what happens as you become more insulin resistant, here's a little cartoon that shows, this is an insulin receptor. Insulin binds to it. It causes a series of things to happen inside the cell that brings this transporter to the cell surface, allows blood glucose to go inside. So insulin binds, this changes conformation. Eventually it sends a signal to bring the transporter up. Glucose goes in. Now you can use the glucose, or it gets stored as fat. But that whole thing gets blocked. It becomes janky if you are overloading your system with too much insulin. So here's all of the stuff that is connected to insulin resistance, all of the diseases that I could put on one slide here. Type 2 diabetes, that's sort of the end stage. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, that's almost 1 in 2 US adults over the age of 40 has some degree of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. High blood pressure, insulin resistance causes high blood pressure about 6 different ways. So for a lot of people, now there's other things that cause high blood pressure, but for the majority of people, if you were to reverse your insulin resistance, you would start to see a drop in your blood pressure. You may not even require blood pressure medicine after a while. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, we're seeing a lot more activity in the fertility clinics, women unable to get pregnant, and the vast majority of it probably has to do with insulin resistance. Weight gain and obesity, obviously, we're at now 3 out of every 4 American adults is overweight. Cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, okay? So there is such a tight link between insulin resistance and dementia. We call it Alzheimer's type 3, or I'm sorry, diabetes type 3 is now how we refer to it. There's such a tight link between these. And the number 2 most common kind of dementia is vascular dementia. That's also mostly caused by insulin resistance. Inflammation and joint pain. The vast majority of people that I ever operated on for chronic spine problems, I would say at least half of them are type 2 diabetics. And I would say probably 90% of them were insulin resistant. Sleep apnea, kidney disease, cholesterol problems, cancer. There is a link. You are more likely to get cancer if you're insulin resistant. That's the bottom line. Stroke, for sure, because of the high blood pressure issues and everything else. Infertility, skin problems, gout, huge deal there. Gastrointestinal problems. You can get paralysis of your gut that's linked to type 2 diabetes. It damages the nerves that go to your gut. So eventually you get gastroparesis. It's a horrible way to go. Cardiovascular disease, the number one killer. Okay. Insulin resistance, what do they normally tell you is the strongest risk factor for having a heart attack? Smoking, right? You always hear it's smoking. And that's true, but fewer people today proportionately are smoking these days. And yet heart disease and heart attacks still number one killer. What's the other common denominator? Insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is the number one cause of heart attacks, period, per capita. Recent health status studies have shown that only about 12% of the nation is metabolically healthy. 88% of everybody else, man, woman, and child, has some degree of insulin resistance. So this is a huge problem. And it's starting now in kids. I think I saw one study, the fastest growing demographic of new obese patients is children aged 2 to 5 years old. 2 to 5. So the problem isn't in your genes. It's obviously, if age 2 to 5 is the fastest growing demographic of obese patients, well, it's not your genes. We haven't got all these kids that suddenly got some new genetic deformity that is making them obese during infancy. Instead, it is the food that we eat, the food environment that we're in. Here's the percentage of calories that we're eating in terms of refined carbohydrates. Corn is 5%, wheat 19%, rice, I was shocked that it was only 1%, but that's the case. Sugar is 14.5%. So the sugar is by far the worst of these refined carbs because it contains a lot of fructose. The glucose and all these others, any cell in your body can manage it. The fructose, though, that's in sugar only goes to your liver. And when your liver gets chock full of fructose that is then converted into fat, that's when you start becoming insulin resistant. A fatty liver causes insulin resistance. And you don't have to be fat to have a fatty liver, by the way. There's a lot of countries we look at where we saw a massive increase in diabetes, but they're not gaining weight that much, but they just so happen to prefer to put their fat into their liver. 40% of our carbs or 40% of our diet is in the form of processed carbs. That's where all this problem is coming from. So instead of taking my dad's, instead of, following the same path that my dad led, I started doing the research. I started realizing that the medications are only mitigating your risk a minimal amount. And honestly, you could 5 times reduce the risk or more, 5 to 15 times reduce your risk by some simple changes in lifestyle. Like, for example, walking for 15 minutes within 15 minutes of eating a meal. That right there cuts your risk for almost all chronic disease by about 50%. 15-minute casual stroll within 15 minutes of eating a meal. I started doing this stuff. My problem was that I couldn't stop eating that sugar. But then I found something a dietitian introduced me to, something that was natural. It wasn't Ozempic, by the way. That's a hint. But it helped me to unplug from this whole thing. And this is what happened. Between these two pictures, a very short amount of time, 4 or 6 months. And all of a sudden, I was shaving the weight off. I rechecked my labs, the pre-diabetes. My pre-diabetes was manifested by a low fasting glucose. So you normally associate diabetes with high glucose, but if you're pre-diabetic, it can show up as a low glucose. Why? Because you have high insulin levels while fasting. So if you got high insulin while fasting, you might actually see a dip in your blood sugar just before you become a full-fledged diabetic. And then as far as my cholesterol panel, totally fixed. I did a sidestep on taking those statins because it lowered my LDL and it also lowered the inflammation in my body. So that was a beautiful thing. And there's a lot of controversy about cholesterol right now. Is LDL really the problem? Is ApoB really the problem if half of everybody that has a heart attack has normal levels of these things? And that's the thing that they have a hard time explaining. Here's what we do know. Probably, yes, the higher your LDL level is, the higher your risk. But it also seems to be in the context, if you've got high inflammation and high LDL, way more risk, but you might be able to more than, you could lower your risk more than taking a statin by simply lowering your insulin resistance, probably. So I started introducing this idea to friends. This is James. James started on the same protocol that I did, that finally allowed me to break out of the sugar cycle and the carb craving cycle. And then over the course of about 9 months, James dropped 70 pounds. Now he's dropped, this was a while back, he's dropped now 100 pounds. Multiple people after this that I introduced to this, you start to see things happen with their weight. The women, woman was a regular exerciser, but she put this inner tube on in the middle of all that because you can't outrun a bad diet. Suddenly, when she reverses the insulin resistance, boom, over and over and over and over. This is Jesus. He's lost 100 pounds and absolutely loving life. This gentleman here had been a diabetic for almost 30 years and suddenly now not a diabetic after 30 years. So I told you insulin resistance is like the cause of type 2 diabetes. And for the longest time, the American Diabetes Association said, diabetes is a progressive disease, kind of like cancer or something. And once you get it, it progresses. You don't. And then finally, recently, they've changed their position on this, that it is a potentially reversible. I want to say it's an absolutely reversible disease, type 2 diabetes. This gentleman here weighed 1/4 of a ton, lost over 115 pounds. He was on 24 medicines, now on 3 medicines. That just goes to show you. I would have loved to have been in the room when the doctor was telling him, look, I know you're already on 23 medicines, but we got to add one more. It's going to help you, I promise, this time. Suddenly, isn't it funny how he's still morbidly obese here, and yet he only needs 3 medicines? How is that? Obviously, I mean, you would think most morbidly obese people would need, a bunch of medicines, right? I mean, that's the American medicine way. But when you start getting the metabolism right, suddenly you don't need those medicines anymore. Michelle, again, look at that. You can see the swelling in her face. Boom. So how did I do this? How did all these other people do this? It's a simple system that's completely natural with no side effects that can help you break out of the system. This is the worst nightmare for Big Pharma, because Big Pharma made their money in the beginning from antibiotics. Kill the bugs, kill the bugs. They learned how to kill bugs, and then they made that into a business, making antibiotics. But the problem was, when you kill the bugs, the disease is gone. It's over. So they wanted to figure out, how can we manage chronic disease? Because that's where the long-term money is. That's a recurring residual income month after month if we manage the disease. So that's where the industry went. Let's make medical management drugs, and it exploded. And now they're, $100 billion gorillas, all of these pharmaceutical companies. They kind of control the curriculum that doctors learn in medical school, particularly as it pertains to pharmacology. And they also control the research money, even within the National Institute of Health, which is allegedly supposed to be an unbiased and organization. But many of the people that work at the National Institute of Health, when they finish their time there, they are kind of guaranteed a high-paying executive job, usually at a pharmaceutical company. So that's kind of the issue there. That's what's hot topic in politics right now. But this simple natural thing that is not tied to big pharma has been studied now quietly by the Cleveland Clinic and Columbia University, two of our Ivy League institutions, but also the University of Utah and the University of Sydney, where the glycemic index was invented. If you're diabetic, you definitely know what the glycemic index is. And now a growing number of other institutions, and they are catching on that this stuff works. In fact, so much so that now it is HSA and flex spending account eligible. All you need is a letter of medical necessity from your doctor, and those accounts will pay for this. They are listed in the PDR. This was the study done by at the Cleveland Clinic, which is the #1 heart hospital in the United States. And basically their conclusion, and because of this, it's now listed in the PDR, which is our doctor Bible of medicines, pharmaceuticals. We looked at the PDR to find out about a drug, and both of these little nutraceuticals I'm about to introduce to you are listed there. You don't get in there unless you've got very credible evidence behind it. But the conclusion of the #1 heart hospital in the US, such a product, if taken regularly, could reduce cardiovascular risk on a population basis and potentially decreases the need and or dose for lipid-lowering prescription drugs like statins. So what is it? It's this thing right here that I've now been taking for 3 years and will probably never stop taking, because this is your metabolic shield. Some people say, well, can I how long do I have to take it? And I think back to like my dentist, when I say, do you have to floss your teeth or do you have to floss all of your teeth? And they would say, no, just the ones you want to keep, and it's kind of like that with this system here. As long as you want to stay healthy in the food environment that we live in, because our lives are scrambled, man. We're always on the move. You can't always sit there and meal prep a meal with, 12 sources of plant fiber in it and, no sugar and all the other stuff that you need to have in the meal to be healthy. That's not always feasible for everybody. So this kind of is the metabolic shield that helps you to filter a lot of stuff and cut down on how much you're eating easily without all the side effects. And, now if you can meal prep like that, great, more power to you, do it. But I'm not that organized, and a lot of people aren't. And so the way it works is 2 nutraceuticals. One is called Unimate, one's called Balance. In this Unimate here, it's got a chlorogenic acid in it. It's an extract from a tea called yerba mate. But this one here, we've demonstrated raises your body's GLP-1 by 60%. So when I wake up in the morning, I skip breakfast. You've always heard breakfast is the most important meal of the day, haven't you? No, it is not. There's clear evidence that breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. You don't need to always eat breakfast at all. And probably the best thing I did for my health was to quit eating breakfast. By the way, this is this Unimate tea right here. So it will raise your body's GLP-1. Now, you've heard GLP-1 before. You've heard of Ozempic, tirzepatide, and Zepbound, all that stuff. Those medicines, what you need to understand, GLP-1, there's a little science of this. I don't want to bore you with it, but there's this other peptide. It's called ghrelin. That little rumble in your tummy in the morning when you feel hungry, that's ghrelin telling you to go get something to eat. And GLP-1, when it's high, suppresses the ghrelin so you don't feel hungry. So Ozempic, tirzepatide, Zepbound, all these medicines, they mimic GLP-1, shut down your ghrelin, but they do it for 2,500 times longer than your body's own GLP-1 does it. Okay. So you got to understand there's this little concept in biology. It's called homeostasis. If you shove one system one direction, there's going to be a pushback. So you're getting married to this drug. If you suppress your ghrelin 2,500 times longer than your GLP-1 does it for itself, then when you come off that drug, there's all of a sudden going to be this huge pushback. This is why everybody regains the weight. And we don't know the long-term effects of these medications, but what we are seeing in animal models is they're getting thickening of their small bowel, lengthening of the small bowel, become more prone to bowel obstruction, inflammation of the bowel, absorption problems. So there are no real long-term studies on this. We're also seeing, all the stuff, muscle loss, which is your muscle is key to staying metabolically flexible. If a drug is making you lose muscle, you're getting married to the drug. Okay. That's the fact, for better or for worse. So with this, instead, it only just boosts your body's own GLP-1 rather than this lizard peptide that they modeled it after a lizard peptide. This lizard only eats like twice a year. We don't do that. We eat every day, or at least 5 or 6 days a week. You don't want to be doing what a lizard that only eats a few times a year does. Okay, that's not natural. And like I say, I'm not saying those drugs should never be used. I think in my opinion, they are for type 2 diabetics who are or what they call double diabetes. If you're type 1 diabetic, but you've been eating real bad, and now you've got insulin resistance and type 1 diabetes, then okay, maybe that. But apart from that, I don't think people that are just simply trying to lose 30, 40 pounds, personally, I don't think this is appropriate use of those drugs. I don't care if you're microdosing it. I don't care if you're shooting it in the air and wafting it on yourself. It's not, in my opinion, appropriate. This, however, should be the first line of therapy for anyone with any of the factors of metabolic syndrome. I venture to say, if they mandated that this was first line therapy, we would probably shave off about 25% of the Medicare bill every year. So the second thing here is Balance. Balance, both of these are patented products, but Balance has about 10 to 14 different plant sources of fiber, which is the magic behind it. Well, we have found that simply taking in 35 grams of fiber isn't enough. It needs to be fiber from multiple plant sources, because not all plants are created equally. And apparently we get different benefits from different sources of plant fiber. It's the difference between going to the symphony and hearing only the horns versus hearing all of the entire orchestra. Totally different experience, totally different effect. Same way with getting one plant source, which most of what our diet consists of is inulin. That's the most common plant fiber that people get. You can add to that some Metamucil, but it's still only one plant source. I've taken a mess of Metamucil and Benefiber. It did nothing to stop my hunger. It didn't really do much of anything for me. But when I went on this, within 2 days, I knew something was going on. My hunger was different. I forgot to eat lunch one day. That hadn't happened in a long time. And I was in control. Then I could make better decisions of what to eat at the dinner table. So the regimen is drink the Unimate tea in the day. You're burning your own fat for energy during that time. And then you have a balance either before lunch or dinner, whichever tends to be your highest carb containing meal for the day. That's it. You mix it in this bottle. It's got 2 lines, one for the balance, one for the Unimate. Sip the Unimate during the day, and then just down that balance right before you have a meal. It's going to fill you up. It's going to coat the food, slow down how fast the glucose hits your bloodstream, and you just don't end up not eating as much. You want to drink the balance pretty quick, because it turns into a gel after about 10 minutes, and you don't want to drink that thick stuff. You want to drink it while it's still watery. So since then, here's how you start to realize that something is got validity to it, is the doctors start becoming distributors in this. Here's Dr. Midge, an endocrinologist. So one of the big things that she treats is diabetes, metabolic syndrome. And she's now a distributor with me in this. Dr. Tiffany Hendricks, family medicine. Dr. Steve Brown, anesthesiology. Dr. Kenneth Harper, a surgeon. There are multiple dietitians in there, some of them nationally known, like Lindsay Venn, and also Shannon Davis, who's on the board of the American Diabetes Society. Dr. William Stiles, urologist. So once you start seeing multiple doctors getting involved with something, you realize this is the beginning of a wave that is taking over. It is, and I fully expect that there's going to be some kind of pushback by pharmaceutical companies once this reaches critical mass. Once you start seeing 1 or 2% of the U.S. population on this product, which that we're approaching that, then you're going to see an attack. They're going to try to sabotage it some way or another. I'm fully predicting that. Here's just a few of the testimonials of people who've been on the product. This product's amazing. 7 pounds down, but my body looks and feels so much better. It's almost like I feel my body sculpting. I hear a lot of people say melting. That's the way I felt. I was melting. And does that make sense? A1C from 8.5 to 5.7, lost 22 pounds, dropped 4 inches in size. When the insulin goes low, the fat will go. Insulin, high insulin levels, blocks an enzyme. It's called a hormone sensitive lipase. It's the enzyme that actually chops the fatty acids off of the fat in your cells so that you can burn it for energy. If you got high insulin levels, that lipase is blocked. You can't burn your own fat. Once the insulin levels drop, that enzyme gets active again. Suddenly you can start burning your fat again. Okay. Lost 20 pounds, normalized my triglyceride levels, reversed my pre-diabetes, improved my energy. Everybody talks about the energy levels and the brain fog goes away. Triglycerides down from 247 to 86. She basically had that layer of fat that congeals on the top of like a roast beef after you put it in the fridge. That's probably what her blood looked like at 247. More energy, lost 13 pounds. Amazing product. My husband reversed his diabetes in 5 months. Okay. Reversed it. Didn't manage it. Okay. Glipizide, metformin, those manage it. This helped reverse it because it helps you to break out of that eating pattern so that then you can, honestly, it's the diet that actually makes this happen. The problem for so many people that are insulin resistant is they crave that stuff that keeps them in the metabolic syndrome zone. So it's a disruptor that helps you to break out. And so I lowered my cholesterol from 7.56 to 5.7 in 90 days, reversed my pre-diabetes. Notice the cholesterol and the diabetes hand in glove. Okay. So something special for you if you decide this is what you want to do. If you want to give this a go, have that experimental mindset for a minute. Say yes every now and then. Not everybody's so skeptical these days, and then rightfully so. There's a lot of scams on the internet, but this isn't one of them. Okay. I'm a career neurosurgeon, pretty much at the peak of my career, and I'm sitting here promoting something that I really believe in, which goes back to my father. This is something I wish that he had access to, but it is, bottom line, something that works. I just had somebody that she's a physician's assistant, I believe, or advanced practice nurse. And the message from her last night was right here. She said, I'm going in my second week, no issues at all, and down 9 pounds. That's probably more like 6 though, because I think some of that was probably water weight. She says, I can't believe I found something that's going to work for me because it's actually manageable. I tried Wellbutrin and GLPs, and side effects took me out. She actually had the dreaded depression side effects from the GLP-1s, but she also had a lot of gastrointestinal issues with it. So here, to even entice you more to this, I'm going to give you the lab cheat sheet. There are a number of labs that you need to get checked, probably at least once a year, some of them more than that your doctor, I'm pretty sure, doesn't check. The vast majority of them don't. That these are the real labs that you need to know about to see if you're truly getting healthier. And by the way, if you go on this protocol, you can watch these numbers start to drop and get in the good zone. So I'll give you this lab cheat sheet for free. All you do is subscribe to the system. Another thing I'm going to give you, the metabolic reset protocol. This is an eating framework, not a diet, framework, so that no matter what kind of food you like to eat, then you can work within this framework to keep yourself metabolically healthy. The apps and wearable technology guide. These, there are certain metrics that are being measured on these new wearable tech that some of them are useful, some of them not so much, and some of them don't measure it well, even if it's measuring something important. I've created a curated list of tech that I think is worth your while that will actually help you move the needle. You'll get this guide for free. Okay, so all 3 of these guides you'll get for free. You'll get 3 coaching calls from me. I'll help tailor your experience. If there's certain things that, your dietary concerns or whatever, I'd like the last person there, she can't eat certain types of meat and things like that. That's fine. We'll work together to straighten everything out so that you get what you're looking for out of this. I truly want you to have success on this. Plus, you get a permanent 32% discount with my link. You're getting it at the same price that I get it. You get a 90-day money-back guarantee. So you really have nothing to lose. Okay, Ozempic's not going to give you a 90-day money-back guarantee. Even if you happen to land in the ICU with a nasogastric tube down your nose and in your belly, they're not going to give you a dime back. But you can do this without worrying about the risk of serious side effects, and you can not even have to lose any money. If you're not satisfied, all you do is request your money back. You get it. It's easy to do that. So you get with your subscription, and not a one-time buy, okay? And it's actually cheaper to subscribe, and it's very easy to stop. Okay, it's not like Mudwater that I had to basically get a letter from my congressman to make that subscription stop. You just go back to the youfeelgreat.com website, which I'm going to give you a link to. You need to use my link though, because that's the only one that's got the super discount on. And you're going to get the 3 cheat sheets. You get the 3 training calls. You get a permanent, actually 32% discount and 90-day money-back guarantee just for signing up. All right. So that's it. Don't make the mistakes like so many people are doing, neglecting things until a serious health event happens. Don't think that you are helpless. Maybe you tried a bunch of stuff and you really just feel like nothing has ever worked for you. And you're sitting here thinking, you know what, this is just one more thing. I hear so much stuff and, nothing really has ever done the trick. Why should I even bother? Look, you got nothing to lose. But you have everything to potentially gain from this. So, you're not even losing much time. How much time does it take to do the transaction to make this purchase? How much time does it take to dump a packet of this into this bottle, shake it up, and start drinking it? It doesn't take you any time. It's not any effort. And then from there, you and I work together, make sure we get your diet on track, which will be so much easier because you're just not starving for the carbs and the sugar like you did before. Please reach out to me, direct message me here, whether it's you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, YouTube, whatever. Let me put my email address up here if I can. My email address. I wonder if I can do this. Is eric@neurohealthflow.com. Neuro, N-E-U-R-O, healthflow.com. Maybe you can see that in the chat. Then that is my email address. Here, let me see if I can add something here. Local video. No. I haven't fully figured out Restream yet, how to tag stuff in there. But if you do that, and by the way, you can get to my link for this product in my bio, whatever platform you're on. Go into my bio. There's a Linktree link. Click that Linktree link, and then you'll see a Linktree or a tab that says Feel Great. This is called the Feel Great system. And let me see if I got that here. Yeah, the Feel Great system. You'll just see that. Click it, and that'll take you through a little series of videos, and then you can use that link there. It's the same one that will get you the discount. Once I see your name pop up on my list, I'll give you a text. I'll send you an email with your guides. If you don't want the training, that's fine. All you got to do is say so. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Just say, I'm good. I got it, and I understand a lot of people don't want a lot of training. But if you do, we're going to become friends in this. I want to see you succeed. All right. Guys, have a great day. Don't procrastinate. Don't doubt. Just try. It's like that movie, The Yes Man.